She was rejected for being too big. Until a widowed count fell for her soul. A tale of inner beauty. If your whole life has been judged by a body you never chose, would you still believe that true love exists? Veracruz, 1875. The sun had yet to rise. A salty breeze from the sea brushed through the palm trees along the dock, carrying with it the scent of dried fish, seaweed, and the chill of a place long acquainted with farewells. In a small red-tiled kitchen at the end of a row of adobe houses, a woman bent over, using a white cloth to remove the last round loaves of bread from a brick oven. Her hands were strong, marked with old burn scars, yet her movements were gentle, almost reverent. Each loaf was placed on the cloth as if she were laying down the final memory of a former life. Her name was Luz María. An unremarkable name, not elegant or noble, but one people still remembered like a lantern quietly burning in the night, no big flame, but never extinguished. She was not beautiful by society's standards. No slim waist, no rosy cheeks, and certainly not accompanied by titles like lady or madam. Her body was full, sturdy, the kind that men usually overlooked and women whispered about behind their hands. And yet, her eyes could hold anyone's gaze if they looked long enough, warm brown eyes, deep and still, as though they had witnessed much but never lost their gentleness. This morning, she wasn't baking to sell as usual. She baked out of habit a farewell ritual to herself. Today, she would leave this place, leave behind the kitchen, the smell of flour, the early morning birdsong, and the quiet, enduring years of her life. On the wooden table before her lay a sealed letter, neatly folded, as if the writer feared breaking a fragile hope. It was from Don Prudencio Aguayo, a wealthy landowner from Santa Clara del Llano. In the letter, he said nothing of love, nor did he call her Miss or Madam. He simply wrote, "I need a woman who respects silence and understands duty." No declarations. No demands for affection. Just the need for someone by his side. For Luz María, that was enough. Enough to make her believe that maybe her life wasn't completely meaningless. She may not have been called a beauty, but perhaps, just perhaps, someone had chosen her, if only through a few strokes of ink. She sold everything: the old iron oven, the amber earrings that were her mother's keepsake, even the lace handkerchief she crocheted during lonely rainy nights. It was barely enough for a train ticket and to send her luggage ahead. In the small wooden trunk were 2 clean dresses, a notebook of her mother's bread recipes, and a patched quilt made of old fabric scraps, the only thing that still carried the scent of home. As the train let out a long whistle and pulled away from the station, no one came to see her off. No one cried. But inside her, there was a sound louder than the iron wheels grinding on the tracks: "I was not born to live small in the eyes of others." The journey lasted 3 days. The train passed through endless sugarcane fields and mountains that slumbered beneath layers of fog. She didn't sleep much. At night, she wondered, what kind of look will that man give me? Will it be curiosity, disappointment, or nothing at all? And if the answer was nothing at all, would she have the courage to turn back? She didn't know. But she believed that if she didn't go, she'd live a life as forgettable as the many loaves of bread she had made delicious, but remembered by no one. On the 3rd afternoon, the train stopped at a tiny station with whitewashed walls, red tile roofs, and a few lanterns that hadn't yet been lit. The station sign was faded, but Luz María could still read it: Santa Clara del Llano. This was it. The land of opportunity, or of despair, no one knew. She stepped down, one hand holding the quilt, the other dragging the heavy trunk. No one was there to greet her. No flowers, no one calling her name. Just dust and a few unfamiliar stares. Then a wrinkled, middle-aged man approached and said quietly, "Are you Luz Maria? Don Prudencio sent me." He asked nothing more. She said nothing more. As the cart rolled down the bumpy dirt road, Luz Maria looked back at the station, the first place where she ever thought she might be accepted. She didn't yet know that just hours later, that hope would be shattered without mercy. The road to Don Prudencio's estate wasn't long, but it stretched every bone and thought in Luz Maria's body. Each crunch of gravel under the wheels echoed her own whisper, "Am I about to touch something bigger than fate?" The scenery shifted, wild fields gave way to plowed lands, distant silhouettes of cacti and dry agave trees the only things that defied the highland winds. A long white wall stretched toward the horizon, behind it a large house with thick walls, a tall roof, moss-covered stone corridors, and solemn old trees. This was Hacienda El Retiro. When the cart stopped at the main gate, no one came out. No greetings. No instructions. She stepped down, still holding the quilt not for warmth, but to shield her heart. Then he appeared. Don Prudencio Aguayo, the man who wrote the letter, stood at the top step. Immaculately dressed, his chin jutted out with arrogance, narrow eyes revealing everything. When his gaze landed on Luz Maria's body, it took him less than 2 seconds to judge an entire person. A frown, a slicing glance from head to toe, and then just one sentence. "Not what I expected." No greeting. No introduction. No explanation. No courtesy. Just 4 words like a door slammed shut without needing a reason. He turned and walked inside, leaving the courtyard as cold as if it had stood empty for centuries. She remained still as the staff watched, some avoiding her gaze, others smirking. The afternoon wind kicked up a thin layer of dust, rising like a wound freshly cut. Luz Maria didn't cry. Didn't yell. Didn't ask why. She had anticipated rejection. She just hadn't expected it to be so hollow and cruel. The same driver now ordered to take her back to the station said nothing. He loaded the trunk silently. She climbed back in, still clutching the quilt, as if it were the last shred of dignity she had. No one spoke on the return. She needed no comfort. He didn't know how to offer kindness. Between them was a silence heavier than the wooden trunk. When they reached the center of Santa Clara del Llano, the only place still lit, he stopped in front of an old pharmacy. A dim yellow light glowed. No sign. He placed her trunk on the sidewalk and turned the cart around, offering only an awkward nod. Luz Maria stood there, clutching her quilt, staring at the faint light inside the pharmacy like a gateway between ruin and final hope. She pushed the door open. An old man sat behind the counter, reading. The oil lamp cast a glow on his foggy round glasses. Without looking up, he asked, "What do you need?" She answered, "I need a place to stay for the night." He looked up. Their eyes met. No pity. No sorrow. Just observation and then recognition. He pointed to a narrow staircase at the back. Upstairs. Small, but clean. If you can stay, then stay. Luz Maria bowed her head in gratitude. When she opened the door upstairs, she saw an old single bed, a wobbly-legged desk, and a window with a termite-eaten latch. But she exhaled because at least this time, no one asked her to be pretty enough to be allowed to stay. That night, for the first time in years, Luz Maria let go. She was not the returned bride. Not the oversized woman. She was simply a person learning how to begin again from a crack. Before sleeping, she touched the little notebook in her trunk and flipped to the page where her mother had written, "Yeast needs time to rise just like you need time for your courage to rise too." And Luz Maria, though rejected by the world, sat quietly among wounds yet to heal and began to wonder if she might bake again. The next morning, Santa Clara del Llano lay beneath a soft mist, hovering like smoke, warm yet cold. Luz Maria descended the creaky wooden stairs, clutching the folded quilt. Downstairs, the pharmacist Don Mateo was already awake, lightly shaking jars of herbs, listening to their sounds like an old melody he knew by heart. When he saw Luz Maria, he didn't ask, "Did you sleep well?" or smile. He simply said, "If you need a stove, it's behind the house. There's not much firewood, but enough." Luz Maria nodded. No one asked why she needed a stove. No one questioned why a strange woman clutched a trunk and lived like wind. Perhaps people here were used to stories left unfinished and knew that some wounds just need a quiet place to heal, without asking names. That afternoon, smoke rose from the back of the pharmacy. In a space barely big enough for two, Luz Maria began kneading dough. Her hands remained strong, the old burn on her thumb like a warrior's scar. She didn't have much money, but enough for flour, eggs, a little sugar, and the most important thing, canela cinnamon. Her mother used to say, "Cinnamon is like hope bitter, but when in bread, it warms the soul." The wood stove crackled. The scent of sweet bread seeped into the bricks, mingling with herbs and aged wood. For the first time in many days, Luz Maria smiled. Not broadly, just a faint curl of the lips, but enough to know she was still herself. She didn't open a shop. She just took a white tablecloth, placed a woven basket by the town square's public well, one small table, a wooden box for coins, and a dozen light brown round loaves dusted with sugar. No sign. No shouting. No begging. She simply sat there like a quiet note in the chaotic song of the town. Head held high. Eyes not lingering on anyone too long. But her heart open, like the warm oven behind the pharmacy. The first to buy was a little girl with messy braids, clutching a rusty coin. She didn't ask the price, just took a loaf and ran. Then came an old man with a silver beard who sniffed the bread like inhaling a lost memory. He nodded and left 2 coins. Then came a group of women. They didn't buy. They stood 3 steps away, whispering, "That's the woman who got rejected. Because of her body. Too large. Doesn't she know what she looks like?" Luz Maria heard every word. But she didn't turn. She quietly draped a white cloth over the remaining bread like covering a wound no one needed to touch. That night, in the pharmacy's kitchen, she kept kneading dough. Not because she had sold all the bread, but because it was the only thing in this world that had never judged her. In every mix, every press, every roll and shaping motion, there was the presence of her mother, of childhood memories, of days when she still believed in miracles. Flour coated her hands, her hair tousled from the smoke. But her heart, for the first time since the rejection, wasn't burning with shame. It had quieted, like the rising dough waiting patiently to be baked. Then she remembered her mother's words. "Whatever leaves your hands will return to you. Just not in the way you expect." And when she blew out the final oil lamp in the kitchen, Luz Maria closed her eyes, not to hide but to prepare. Tomorrow, she would sit at the market once again, not to sell, but to prove to the world that some things cannot be rejected: dignity and hands that know how to create love. The town of Santa Clara del Llano had mornings where the sunlight arrived slower than usual, as if even the sun hesitated under judgmental eyes. Luz Maria sat once more by the stone well, her chosen shop, with the same white cloth, a basket of fragrant bread, and a calm demeanor that outshone any wealthy person in town. That morning, an older woman appeared. She wore a charcoal gray shawl, her silver hair tightly pinned, her face carved with lines that made her seem unapproachable. She stopped before the basket. She didn't bend to inspect the bread. She didn't speak. She simply stood there as if she were observing not the basket, but the woman behind it. Luz Maria did not flinch. Gently, she lifted a small bun, placed it on the white cloth, and pushed it forward like a silent greeting. The woman nodded. She didn't take the bread. She didn't leave. She just asked a single question, husky and clear like an old chapel bell. "Can you read?" A strange question, but Luz Maria didn't furrow her brows. She replied calmly, "Yes. I used to read to my mother before she passed." A faint glimmer passed through the woman's eyes. "And can you sew?" "Yes. Even raincoats if needed." She said nothing more. She placed a folded note on the cloth and walked away, upright like a broomstick, proud and decisive. Luz Maria opened the note. A single line, unsigned. "Be at Hacienda San Remigio, at dawn. Answer with action, not words." Hacienda San Remigio. Just saying the name made many townspeople lower their voices. Once belonging to an old noble family, where violins played each night and parties lasted until morning, it had become a place of sorrow since the sudden death of its mistress Clara de Solozano. No one spoke of her death, and no one dared mention the surviving husband Bruno Castañeda y del Valle, a man with silent beauty, always dressed in dark clothes, mourning a world that no longer existed. Only 3 women remained as the soul of the place, the late Countess's 2 young daughters, and the elderly housekeeper Dona Brigida, who had handed Luz Maria the note that morning. At dawn the next day, Luz Maria arrived on time. A rickety carriage was already waiting. No one asked her name. The coachman, a quiet young man, simply nodded and gently tapped the horse's reins. As they traveled to the hacienda, the landscape began to change. Cobblestone roads twisted along the hillsides, endless meadows stretched into the distance, and finally, an ivy-covered wall wrapped around a mansion that looked like a fortress. The heavy wooden gate creaked open as if it hadn't moved in centuries. Dona Brigida met her at the main entrance. No greeting. No smile. She spoke directly. "We don't need a storyteller here. Just someone who won't disturb the silence. Do you understand?" "I understand. Rooms upstairs. 2 children, 1 older, 1 younger. You'll manage lessons, meals, and silence when required." The grand staircase of San Remigio was wider than any room Luz Maria had ever rented. Wooden steps bowed by time, wallpaper aged and curling, thick glass windows coated in dust. Every step she took felt like walking through someone else's memory. Then the door to the children's room opened and everything changed. The older girl, Josefina, about 9, had her hair tightly tied back, her dress ironed crisp like church vestments. She sat at a wooden desk writing with a quill. Her eyes didn't look at strangers, but her ears were alert. The younger one, Leonor, around 5 or 6, with wild curly hair, was running around the room with a rag doll. When she saw Luz Maria, she stopped. "Who are you?" she asked, voice sweet and clear as silver bells. Luz Maria crouched gently and said, "My name is Luz Maria. I'm here to study with you if you'd like. Are you our new mom?" The question struck like an arrow to the heart, one no one in this house dared to touch. Luz Maria paused for a beat. Then smiled, eyes filled with kindness. "I'm not your mother. But I can be here when you need someone." Josefina said nothing. She simply stood, left the desk, and walked into the adjoining room, leaving behind an unspoken answer: "You're not worth my attention." That first night at the hacienda, Luz Maria saw no trace of the master of the house. No footsteps. No greetings. Only the echo of her own steps in the long, shadowy halls, like someone not truly welcome. But one thing she knew for sure. Not all doors need keys to open. Sometimes, all it takes is a loaf of bread, a lullaby, or patience to make a closed heart open on its own. And Luz Maria would begin, not with a man, but with 2 children. In a small west-facing room in Hacienda San Remigio, where the light slipped in only briefly before noon, Luz Maria began the children's first lessons, not from a syllabus, not with expensive books, but with old paper scraps, worn-out quills, and a soft voice that once knew how to hush hunger in the heart. Leonor, with her bouncing curls and wide eyes, quickly became enchanted by the world Luz Maria wove with simple stories. She giggled when Luz Maria used breadcrumbs as alphabet letters or made a doll tell fairy tales. Josefina, by contrast, was a locked world. She didn't resist, but she didn't cooperate either. Every time Luz Maria asked a question, Josefina answered with a cold stare, then resumed her perfect handwriting as if precision were her last fortress after the storm named Mother's death. And Luz Maria understood. Children who have lost something don't give trust the way other children do. They need time. They need presence unconditional. No rush. No force. In the days that followed, she lived like a shadow drifting through the dusty hallways. She cleaned rooms, washed towels, warmed milk for the children each morning, read them stories at night, and always quietly retreated whenever she heard men's footsteps echo through the stone halls. Bruno, the master of the house, remained like a phantom. Not because he was avoiding them, but because he lived in a world of his own, where every corner still held the form of the woman he lost. She knew he hadn't forgotten and might never forget. But that didn't make Luz Maria sad. She hadn't come here to be loved. She came because she needed a place to be truly herself. Until one rainy night. The storm came suddenly. Wind howled through the old roof tiles. The candlelight in the children's room flickered like Luz Maria's heart when she saw Josefina flushed red, sweating, trembling under the thick blanket. A fever had come fast, like the memory of a mother visiting in sleep. Leonor panicked and ran for help, but no one answered. The maids feared disturbing the master. The housekeeper was still in the kitchen. Only Luz Maria remained. She brought water, cooled cloths, changed the damp clothes. She stayed by Josefina's bedside for hours. As she wiped the child's brow, Josefina grabbed her hand. "Mom," she whispered, eyes glassy with fever. Luz Maria didn't correct her. She didn't deny it. She simply leaned in and hummed a lullaby one her own mother used to sing when Luz Maria lay burning with fever on a mud floor. Outside, thunder roared. Rain slammed the roof like tearing old wounds. But inside, a lullaby, deep, warm, cracked but steady, held a little soul steady against the fear of being motherless. And at the doorway, Bruno stood. He didn't enter. He said nothing. But he had heard the song. He had seen his daughter's face soften in the glow, comforted by a hand that wasn't her mother's, but comforted all the same. He didn't know how to say thank you. He wasn't even sure he had the right. Because this woman, the one he once deemed unworthy of this place, was doing what he had failed to do, bring warmth back to a house long gone cold. He turned away, leaving behind the hum of a nameless hymn, floating past stone walls, damp tiles, and wounds that still hadn't healed in his heart. The next morning, when Josefina's fever broke, she no longer looked at Luz Maria as a stranger. She didn't say much, just handed her an old book, a poetry collection her mother used to read. Luz Maria accepted it, knowing this. A child does not offer poetry to someone they do not trust. And so, the first door had opened not with a key, not with authority but with a lullaby, something only someone who truly cares can sing. That afternoon, he passed by the library, the room where Clara used to sit for hours reading, writing in her journal, organizing correspondence. It had remained untouched since the day she died. The stack of books was layered in dust, the writing desk draped in white cloth, the drawers still locked. He never entered. No one was allowed to. As if the room itself were a second grave, built solely for memory. But this time, his footsteps didn't turn away. Instead of walking past like always, he paused, his hand resting on the doorknob. Just a little, just to open a sliver. He stepped inside. The room was cold. The scent of old paper mixed with peppermint oil, the one Clara always used to keep her mind alert. There were still pen marks on the desk, wax seals on the stack of letters, and on the shelf, a book of poems by Alfonsina Storni lay open. The last poem marked with a folded page. Y después del amor, el silencio. After love, silence. Bruno gently closed the book, his hand trembling slightly. He wasn't sure what he was searching for: forgiveness from the departed, or permission to go on living. And suddenly, he saw her in his mind. The woman bent over a small kitchen, wiping sweat from his daughter's brow with a warm cloth, singing softly while holding the hand of a feverish child. A woman who had nothing yet had managed to make this silent house begin to breathe again. He set the book down, not out of fatigue, but from the sudden realization. He was no longer afraid of laughter. No longer afraid of another voice echoing in the home. He was ready to listen again. And at that very moment, in the garden behind the house, where wildflowers tangled around a forgotten stone bench, Luz Maria was reading with Leonor. Josefina sat farther away but never out of sight. For the first time since arriving, Luz Maria no longer felt like the leftover. No longer the rejected. No longer the hired help. She was someone present. The next morning, before sunlight could dry the dew on the ivy vines at the hacienda gate, Luz Maria stood in the back garden, a place long deemed the forgotten land. There, the grass grew wild, roots snaked above ground like veins of the earth, and flower beads once carefully planted were now faded traces of someone who once loved this place deeply. Leonor came running, her small hands covered in soil, eyes sparkling like the morning stars. "Miss Luz. Over there's a little gate hidden under the vines. My mom used to say that was the secret garden." Luz Maria didn't answer right away. She looked toward where Leonor pointed, then nodded gently. "Then let's wake it up together. Shall we? No plan. No help. Just the two of them. A woman once returned like an unwanted item, and a little girl who missed her mother's arms. Beginning to clean." Luz Maria didn't tell Leonor to do things a certain way. She didn't scold her when she pulled up a sprout by accident or got dirt on her dress. Instead, she let her hands get messy, let her dress tear a little, let her laughter rise between the thorny branches so the child could learn that not every wild garden is scary. Some just need someone to care for them, the right way. From a shadowed corner of the second-floor balcony, Bruno watched silently. From his vantage point, he saw two heads leaning together, one dark and somber, the other light brown and bright, like two souls whispering, no longer alone. Beneath their feet, the cracked soil was softening, making way for the first green sprouts to peek through. As if the memories of Clara were beginning to bloom into something new under someone else's hands. That afternoon, Josefina, still wearing her cold composure, appeared at the garden's edge, holding an old brown leather notebook. She didn't come in. She just stood there for a long while, eyes not meeting anyone's, but not turning away either. "I want to help, but I don't know how." Luz Maria looked up and smiled, nodding slowly as if she had waited for those words for a very long time. "You could write down the names of the flowers we find. Each one has a name and a story behind it. Just like people know one is truly nameless." Josefina stepped into the garden. Her first steps were stiff, hesitant. But when Luz Maria handed her the pruning shears and whispered, "This is lavender. People say it helps children who've lost their mothers sleep more peacefully." The girl was quiet for a long time, then nodded. And for the first time, Josefina called her by name. "Miss Luz." Just 2 words. But they made a woman who had once been forgotten feel her heart beat wildly again. After the girls left the garden, Luz Maria stayed behind, gently brushing her hands over the freshly turned soil, murmuring a phrase her mother used to say. "A tree can't choose where it grows, but the gardener can choose how to care for it." Then, footsteps behind her. She didn't have to turn around. She knew who it was. Bruno. He didn't ask what she was doing. Didn't stop her. Didn't give instructions. He just stood there, looking at the garden where Clara had once planted her first flower, now coming back to life under the care of a woman with no noble blood, no claim to inheritance. "This garden has been dead for a long time," he said, his voice raspy not from fatigue, but from emotion, "until today." Luz Maria didn't respond. She didn't want to take anything that once belonged to the woman he had loved. But she didn't back away either. She simply said, "Sometimes, things that seem dead, just need someone willing to believe they're not finished yet." Bruno turned and looked at her, really looked. The sunset cast half his face in warm amber light, but his eyes, they gleamed like a lighthouse freshly wiped of dust. And in that moment it wasn't love. It wasn't hope. It wasn't gratitude. It was something purer. Recognition. That this house had begun to beat with a heart once more. The old stone house of San Remigio had a habit of holding on to echoes from the past. Every step in its halls, every gust of wind through its arched windows, carried the memory of a lost wife, of parties long gone, and of children's laughter buried under mourning. But now, that silence was giving way to another sound. Not loud. Not noisy. But the sound of something returning, not someone, but something felt. Emotion. That night in the dining room, there was no party, no guests, no music. Just 3 chairs drawn closer to the table and the soft flicker of candlelight breathing gently, like a soul. Luz Maria sat beside Leonor, slicing cake into small portions. Josefina poured tea, herself a small act, but the biggest step she had taken since her mother's death. Bruno entered. No one stood. No one had to. He simply looked at the 3 women. One who had begun to stitch the threads of the house back together. And 2 daughters, slowly relearning how to smile. "May I join you for dinner?" he asked. Not in his usual commanding tone, but with something almost shy. Luz Maria looked up. She didn't speak. She just pulled out the chair beside her and nodded. They ate in silence. But it wasn't the painful kind of silence. It was the kind that gave space for people to listen to one another without needing words. After dinner, Leonor asked for a bedtime story. But this time, she didn't ask Luz Maria to read. She asked for her father. "Papa, can you read? Like you did when Mommy was here?" Bruno froze. He looked at the thin book in his hand like a sealed door from the past. But then, he opened it. His voice was no longer stiff. Not too deep either. Just, the voice of a father reading to his child. Josefina lay beside them in silence, eyes closed, lips pressed, pretending not to listen while listening intently. Luz Maria sat farther away, in the corner where the oil lamp cast its soft glow. She didn't join in. She didn't need a role. She simply listened. And in that moment, she realized. Sometimes, what people need isn't to be loved, but simply, not to be pushed away from a place where love could exist. When the girls had fallen asleep, Bruno left the room. But instead of heading to the library or his study, he turned back toward Luz Maria. "Miss Luz," he said, calling her by name, for the first time without title or formality. "I thought I couldn't handle change. But maybe I was wrong." Luz Maria said nothing. She looked at the handkerchief she'd been stitching, her thread trembling, no longer perfectly steady. "You don't need to say that," she whispered, "not if you're not ready." Bruno sighed. A sigh like dry leaves blowing in from a past season. "There are things I've been ready for a long time. I just didn't know how to begin." He paused. "But I think I just did." With a fairy tale. The next morning, Luz Maria found a small box carefully placed beside the firewood pile behind the kitchen. There was no name on the box, only a handwritten note. For the one who gave voice to a story that had no ending. She opened it. Inside was a silver thimble, delicately engraved with jacaranda flowers, the same blossoms once scattered by the wind all across the back garden. She smiled, not broadly, not bitterly, but gently. As if to accept. Sometimes, fate doesn't need to be named. It just needs to arrive at the right time, in the right hands. She slipped the thimble onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Just right to keep stitching the last torn pieces of a heart once broken. That morning was unusually mild for winter, no chill, yet thick gray clouds blanketed the sky as if foreshadowing something imminent. Hacienda San Remigio carried on as usual, the sound of neighing horses from the stables, made sweeping dry leaves along the corridor, and the scent of hot porridge drifting from the kitchen out to the porch. Only one thing was out of the ordinary, the expression in Dona Brigida's eyes. She stood at the top of the staircase, gripping the wooden handrail, watching Luz Maria walk down the east hallway to deliver school books to Josefina. Her eyes, once stern and unreadable, now held something much closer to concern. Not for the house, but for the man who was slowly letting go of his ironclad principles for a woman who bore no noble surname. The rumors began at church, as they often do in small towns, spreading from the holiest places. The first to speak was Donatatia Montiel, a widow dressed in black since last year. Imagine someone who was once turned away from Don Prudencio's house now sitting at the Count's dining table. The world has truly gone upside down. Another voice joined, whispering but clearly pleased. They say she lulls the children to sleep with fairy tales, and now she's lulling the master's heart too. Someone else chimed in, feigning casual interest. But who is she, really? No husband, no family, no money, no dowry. Just bread. Words like tiny needles pricked at the already fragile reputation of Luz Maria. She didn't hear them directly, but she felt them. In the shifting glances at the market. In the greetings that had turned into wordless frowns. The fateful day came sooner than anyone expected. Bruno received a letter unsigned but filled with the venom of someone who knew how to wound. Señor Conde, who is the woman living in your home? A discarded woman. one who disguises her manipulation as kindness. You think you're being cared for, but in truth, you're being conquered. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. Donatadia had written it. The phrasing, the dark blue ink, the perfectly placed exclamation points as sharp as a whispered prayer were all her signature style. Bruno read the letter just as Leonore was giggling. Miss Luz just taught me how to make daisy-shaped cookies. And Josefina, for the first time not hiding in a corner, proudly showed a poem she had asked Luz Maria to help revise. He looked at the two children, Clara's daughters, and then at the woman slicing the cookies, her hands still dusted in flour, her eyes calm, asking nothing. And he knew, the letter didn't make him doubt Luz Maria. But it made him realize, people will never leave untouched the things they cannot control. He walked into his study, summoned the staff, ordered all the townspeople to gather that evening in the main salon. No explanation. Just a single command. Tonight, I need everyone present. At sunset, the wind picked up. Rain began to patter on the tiled roof. One by one, people entered the grand salon, a room that hadn't hosted a gathering since Clara's funeral. Luz Maria was informed by Dona Brigida that she was to attend. Her tone was quiet, but her eyes were firm. Tonight, you may need to stand taller than ever. Luz Maria asked no questions. She wiped her hands clean, put on a simple brown cotton dress, and walked into the crowded room not with pride, but with the posture of someone who has nothing left to lose, yet still holds her dignity. Bruno stood near the fireplace. The flames lit his face, but didn't soften it. He was solemn, resolute. Today, I received an anonymous letter, he began. A letter accusing this woman Luz Maria Alvarado of manipulation, of having her own hidden agenda. No one spoke. No one laughed. Only a silence thick as fog. Bruno raised the letter high. It's a shame. I once believed the author of this letter to be merely a judge in the dark. But I was wrong. This person doesn't just know shadows, they are skilled at spreading poison through envy. He turned to Luz Maria. Slowly. Deliberately. Miss Luz Maria has cared for my children with hands that never asked for titles. She bakes with the very hands others called rough. She sings my daughters to sleep with a voice no one taught her. She doesn't need to beg for anyone's trust because I, who live with her each day, was the first to give it. The room held its breath. If anyone believes they deserve to judge her, then step forward. Look into her eyes. And tell her you are more worthy to remain in this house than she is. No one moved. Not even Donatadia, her eyes hard as iron, only tightened her grip on her fan. Luz Maria looked around slowly. Her face did not smile. But her eyes were wet. Not from pain, but from something far deeper. Someone had finally chosen to stand beside her, not out of duty, but out of truth. That night, back in her room, she opened a small box where she had kept the table linen she brought when she first moved into the hacienda. On it, she had embroidered a single line in white thread. No one can take away what you create with love. She ran her fingers over the stitching. And she knew. The battle was never between rich and poor, noble and common. It was always between truth and whispers. And tonight, truth had won. After the rain, dawn rose with silver light soft like a veil over the hill behind the hacienda. San Remigio was calm, strangely so, as if the storm hadn't been an unveiling of conspiracy, but a cleansing wind, sweeping away years of dust from dark corners. Luz Maria woke early. She stepped into the back garden, where the dahlias had bloomed again, their petals trembling gently in the cool air. She didn't smile like she usually did. Instead, she knelt down, placed one hand on the soil, and closed her eyes. She was giving thanks to the earth for holding her steady through the rumors, the stares, the invisible weights. But when she opened her eyes, Bruno was standing a few steps away. No sound. No words. But something in his eyes this time wasn't watchful. It wasn't assessing. It was longing. Unformed, but honest. Yesterday, thank you, Luz Maria said softly, eyes still on the grass. Bruno shook his head. Don't thank me for doing what's right. I should have done it long ago. She looked up. For a moment, there was no gap between class, title, or history. Only two people, one broken, one cast aside, seeing themselves in the other's quietness. But now, Bruno continued, his voice hoarse like the wind at season's end. I need to know, if you leave tomorrow, what can I do to keep a part of you here? Luz Maria stayed silent. Her hand brushed a dahlia petal, buying time for her racing heart. Why would you want to keep me? The question wasn't defensive. It was necessary. Bruno took a deep breath. He had spoken before hundreds, negotiated with landowners and city councils, but never trembled like this. Because this house never smelled of cinnamon until you arrived. Because my children haven't called anyone mother since Clara died, but Leonor almost has. And because I've never felt truly alive until you dared to look me in the eye, not with reverence, not with fear. Luz Maria turned away. She couldn't let him see the tears quietly shimmering in her lashes. I didn't come here to be loved, she said gently. I came because I needed a roof. A place to stop running. I never asked for marriage, nor titles, nor dared to dream of the heart of a man like you. Bruno stepped closer. His voice softened like the last notes of a lullaby. Then, if I weren't a count, if I were just a man, learning how to love again, would you stay? In the dahlia garden, between morning dew and crisp wind, Luz Maria nodded. No applause. No flower petals in the air. No grand declarations. Just two people standing still. In a garden that had once witnessed the death of memory. And was now bearing witness to the rebirth of something new. That night, Donna Brigida, the woman tougher than church stone, personally brought tea to Luz Maria's room. She didn't say much. Just placed the tray down, and slowly said, if you choose to leave, know that what you've left behind cannot be replaced. Luz Maria looked at her and smiled. And if I stay? Donna Brigida paused at the door, turned back. Then know this. San Remigio for the first time in years has someone truly worthy of holding the kitchen key. Nothing more was needed. From a woman like Brigida. That was a blessing. That night, Luz Maria opened a cabinet and took out her old embroidered cloth, smoothing each crease carefully. She placed it in the center of the table, a quiet declaration to herself. I am no longer a guest. I am the keeper of the flame. And in that room, with the laughter of two children echoing faintly in the distance, a man stood behind the door, his hand resting on the latch, but not stepping inside. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace simply by being on the other side of where the one he loved now lived. The morning at San Remigio seemed no different on the outside, roosters crowing in the distance, sunlight slipping through wooden shutters, and the cheerful crackle of fire from the back kitchen. But something in the rhythm of everyone's footsteps was lighter. No one said it aloud, but everyone noticed. Bruno had changed. And not just because a woman had entered his life, but because he himself had allowed the possibility of becoming a man who could change. In the classroom, Leonore ran over holding a paper filled with clumsy purple flowers. "This is our garden," she exclaimed. "I drew Miss Luz standing in the middle." Josefina glanced at the paper, then added a small figure, Bruno, standing quietly in the back. Not too close. Not too far. Just at the distance where hearts could still see each other. Luz Maria looked at the two girls and saw herself as a child, someone who had no one to laugh with her when her drawing was awkward, someone who once thought happiness was reserved for other people. But today, she knew she had become that person in the eyes of a child. And that warmed her heart more than any promise ever could. That evening, as she was rearranging books in the small library, Bruno walked in unannounced. But this time, he brought no solemnity, no questions, no heaviness. Only a small wooden box. "These are a few things Clara left behind," he said softly. "I haven't had the courage to open it in 4 years." Luz Maria didn't intrude. She understood, everyone carries a box like that where unfinished goodbyes are kept. Bruno set the box down. Opened the lid. Inside were scraps of handwritten notes, a few dried flowers, a frayed blue ribbon. And in the center a letter, unsealed, in a soft, familiar script. "Bruno, if you're reading this, it means I no longer have the chance to tell you aloud." Luz Maria turned her face not out of curiosity, but out of respect. But Bruno placed the letter in her hand. "Will you read it to me?" She looked at him. His eyes didn't blink. Only the tender pain of someone who had lost everything, and was finally ready to face what was left. She opened the letter and read, her voice low and steady like wind touching a window pane. "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm only afraid you won't live on. I don't need you to replace me. I only hope that one day, you'll let your heart open again. If someone comes and stirs your heart, please don't close it for my sake. I don't want to be the shadow that chills you. I want to be the wind still gently blowing where you stand, even from afar." Her voice cracked as she reached the final line. She was not Clara. But she understood Clara. She understood that what Clara wanted was not eternal mourning, but a wholehearted permission to keep living. Bruno stepped forward, took the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it back in the box. "Did you know? Clara once said that if anyone were to take her place, she hoped it would be someone who bakes." Luz Maria laughed a trembling laugh, but no longer soaked in tears. "Then maybe, she chose me long before I ever came here." That night, dinner had no wine, no roast, just a pot of vegetable soup and a few warm loaves of bread. But Josefina served the soup herself. Leonore fed her doll alongside her plate. And Bruno poured tea for Luz Maria, his hands slightly trembling, but his eyes steady. No one said anything, yet everyone understood. This was a family. Not by blood. Not by marriage. But by wounds wrapped and healed with trust. That night, Luz Maria sat alone in the garden, the moonlight streaming through the jacaranda branches. The silvery glow fell across her dress like the gaze of a mother from afar, or maybe Clara's own eyes, calm, gentle, and unburdened. And she thought, "I didn't come here to be loved. I came to live a life where I no longer have to run from my own heart." People often believe that the defining moment in life is when we say "I do" at a wedding altar, or when we sign a binding contract. But sometimes, it's the silent acts, washing hands together in the kitchen, sharing quiet glances in the same direction, that truly make two people faithfully belong to one another. And in San Remigio, in the days after the storm, nothing changed quickly. But step by step, breath by breath, people began to call each other one word: family. One Monday morning, Josefina shyly knocked on Luz Maria's door, clutching a stack of papers. "Miss Luz, I wrote a poem, but I'm not sure if it's any good." Luz Maria wiped her hands and sat down. "Let me see." The paper was crinkled, the ink smudged in spots, but the words were so sincere, they ached. Someone came, though no one had asked. They brought warm bread and a brand new breeze. A hand not born of blood, but gentler than the last rains of the year. When Luz Maria looked up, her eyes were red. "Josefina, you didn't have to write this. I'm here because Because you want to stay," the girl interrupted. "But I also want you to know. I want you to stay too." No one said the word mother. But the hug Josefina gave her that morning, silent, firm, trembling, was a bond of motherhood that needed no blood to be real. That same day, Bruno asked for the back house, once a storage shed behind the stables, to be renovated. When Luz Maria asked why, he simply said, "You need a place that's yours. Not a part of this family, but a place where you get to be yourself." The house had a window facing east where the sun rose and the jacarandas bloomed brightest every spring. "I want to turn it into a bakery," she whispered. Bruno said nothing. He only nodded. And the next morning, he had clay bricks delivered, the best kind for holding heat. No one said "I love you." No one said "we're married." But every brick laid down said it all. A week later, Luz Maria held a small baking class for the village children. Not a big event. Just a few kids, a bit of dough, and laughter smudged in flour. Bruno arrived at the end. He didn't say a word. He just stood at a distance watching Luz Maria tie back a flour-covered girl's hair, smiling as if she had always been that child's mother. A young woman leaned over and whispered to her friend, "Maybe one day, we'll call her La Señora Luz. Not the teacher. Not the maid. Not the new lady of the house. But a name full of respect, affection, and belonging." That evening, Luz Maria found a folded piece of paper on her desk. No signature. But the handwriting, bold and steady, was from someone she had come to understand deeply. "It doesn't matter if you stay or go. Just know this. This place is not a favor. It is a home. And you were the one who lit its first fire." Luz Maria folded the note and tucked it inside her old notebook, the one she'd brought from Veracruz, filled with bread recipes she once thought she'd never use again. And she whispered to herself, "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the wind blew softly. The jacaranda trees swayed. And inside a stone house, hearts once broken were learning how to beat together. The changing season arrived without warning. One night, while everyone was asleep, soft raindrops fell on the tiled roof of Hacienda San Remigio, not hurried, not heavy, but a gentle pattering, like the earth whispering, "It's time to shed and renew." Luz Maria awoke to that sound. Not from the cold, but because her heart stirred with familiar rhythms. Rain, in her life, had never been a curse. It was a sign. A message. A beginning. She wrapped herself in a light wool shawl and stepped onto the porch. The rain soaked the soil, releasing the scent of blooming gardens. Beneath the jacaranda tree, the wet purple petals fell gently, forming a sparkling carpet. And Bruno was there, holding an umbrella but tilted sideways, letting the rain fall on his shoulders. "You hear the rain too?" he asked, voice quiet. "I hear a new season," she replied. The next morning, the villagers were already murmuring, Did anyone else see them standing in the rain together last night? I think they're about to marry. They don't need to. The way they look at each other says it all. Donatella Montiel heard the whispers too. She sat alone in her once grand house, tea long gone cold in her hand. No one visited anymore. The once gilded walls now only echoed a bitter truth: sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't land, it's the trust you've lost. Inside the hacienda, Luz Maria came to a decision. She wanted to write to Dona Lydia, her elderly neighbor in Veracruz, the one who taught her how to crochet after her mother passed. She wrote, "I'm no longer the woman returned like a defective item. I now live in a home where laughter is no stranger. A little girl who isn't mine calls me the first person she looks for after a bad dream. And I know, somewhere, Mother is smiling where no names or titles are needed to prove you're worthy of love." That evening, after returning from inspecting the fields post-storm, Bruno found a small box wrapped in Luz Maria's embroidered cloth on his table. Inside were a warm chestnut loaf of bread, a small notebook labeled "Recipes by Fire, no oven required," and a handwritten note. "If you still intend to ask why I stayed, know that I stayed because you let me be myself without needing to change. I stayed because no one here asked me to be slender, flawless, or polished. I stayed, because at last, there is a man who stood beside me in the rain. And didn't hold the umbrella only for himself." Bruno didn't speak. He simply placed his hand on the box. A silent yes. A proposal with no ring. The next day, the people of Santa Clara del Llano witnessed a scene they would recount for years. Bruno Castañeda y del Valle, the once gold count who had rejected countless noble women, led a small horse-drawn cart, its bed filled with flour, butter, and raisins. Bringing the woman beside him not in silk, not in jewels to the church. No invitations had gone out. But everyone came. Because everyone knew. Love doesn't always need fireworks. Sometimes, it's proven by a warm loaf of bread and a single sentence. You don't need to leave anymore. That night, while Josefina and Leonor took turns arranging dresses for the coming wedding, Luz Maria sat at her sewing table, hands trembling slightly, but eyes alight. Bruno stood behind her, not touching, and said just loud enough for the two of them to hear, "Tomorrow, you'll have my name, if you want it." Luz Maria set the needle down. "I'll carry it not because you gave it to me, but because I chose to take it." Outside, jacaranda petals continued to fall onto damp soil. A new season had arrived. That morning's dawn wasn't more brilliant than others. But for Luz Maria, every step down the sunlit hallway of Hacienda San Remigio felt like walking through a living memory. Each brick she stepped on had once carried silent questions like, "Will this place ever truly belong to me?" Today, that question had an answer. No need for a grand altar. No diamond ring. No title on a calling card. Just two hands clasped. And the world felt whole. Dona Brigida was the first to enter Luz Maria's room that morning, holding a wedding dress. She didn't say congratulations, nor did she act overly warm. She simply laid the dress on the bed and said, "This was sewn from Clara's old silk gown, but altered to fit your form. Because the woman stepping into this marriage is not a replacement but a voice writing the next chapter in her own tone." Luz Maria embraced the dress. Not because it was beautiful, but because it had been offered with respect. On the chapel steps at the far end of the garden, Bruno stood, no wine, no ring, no boutonniere. Just his eyes so warm, people forgot he hadn't smiled for 4 years. Josefina and Leonor walked beside Luz Maria, carrying baskets of jacaranda petals. The little one squealed, "Mommy's here." The older one simply nodded an unspoken, full-hearted acceptance. The wedding had only a handful of guests. The hacienda staff. An aging priest. A few villagers who'd bought bread from Luz María since her earliest days. But in their eyes, there was no gossip. No curiosity. Only the sacredness of witness. The priest asked, "Do you agree to be her shelter not just in sun, but in storm?" Bruno answered, "I've already stood in the rain with her. This is just the next step. And you, Luz María, do you take this man, not as a prize, but as a companion?" She smiled. "I do. Because beside him, I've never needed permission to be myself." There were no fireworks. But as they stepped out of the chapel, the whole garden seemed to bloom in nature's quiet celebration. The wind teased the jacaranda branches, scattering purple petals like soft rain. And amid it all, Leonor tugged Bruno's hand. "Papa, you're smiling so much today." Bruno knelt and held her close. "Because today, I get to live again." That afternoon, the entire hacienda turned into a festival. No fancy orchestra, just a few boys playing mandolin, filling the courtyard with joy. No waitstaff, but Luz María herself brought baked goods to every small table. No speeches, just eyes brighter than wine. An old man, who had lived through 2 hacienda lords, sighed. "This is the first time San Remigio has felt like a place where people don't just work, but live." At sunset, bathed in golden light, Bruno took Luz María's hand and led her into the back garden, under the oldest jacaranda tree that stretched its canopy across the sky. "I once thought of planting something new here," Bruno whispered. "But I realized, some old things don't need replacing. They just need to be understood again." Luz María rested her head on his shoulder. "And some people don't need to arrive on time. They just need to arrive to the right person." Bruno turned to her. "You are not the shade on a sunny day. You are the fire in the night. The scent of bread that means life again." She smiled softly. "Then let me keep lighting the fire every day." As dusk fell, Josefina and Leonor swayed on the garden swing, and Mateo, the little boy born later, ran barefoot across the grass. And everyone understood. This was no longer a hacienda. This was a home. A place where names, bodies, pasts, and gossip no longer defined who people were. Only this remained. A man who learned to apologize and change. A woman who never abandoned herself to be loved. 2 children who learned to forgive and open their hearts. And a jacaranda tree that bloomed again each spring. A sign of love that endures. That waits. And finally, blooms at the right moment. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share. What did this story teach you? How might it shape the way you live or forgive? Your voice matters. Reading your reflections brings strength, healing, and inspiration to us all. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us create more stories that awaken the soul. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you in the next video.